So just to start off with a bit of housekeeping. During the training session, please keep your microphone muted if you're not speaking, but obviously feel free to unmute at any point to ask questions. If you're comfortable to, please turn your camera on. We like to see faces, but no problem if you prefer not to, especially it is being videoed, recorded, sorry. We will share the slides and the recording of the session afterwards. Please feel free to use the chat box for any questions or comments. We'll keep an eye on that throughout the session. And if something isn't clear, please raise your hand. You can also use the thumbs up function to demonstrate agreement. If your name is currently displaying as a username, I think most of you have done it, but if you could update it by clicking on the 3 dots in the top right-hand corner of your photo and to put your name on there, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So let's do some introductions. Thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat box. If you haven't done so yet, please feel free to do that by adding your name, what you're studying and what university or college you're at. I'm Tilly Jarvis, Senior Project Manager at Food and Farming at SOS-UK, and I'll be delivering this training session today with Helen Glanville, who's the lecturer in Geography and Environmental Science at Loughborough University. We've also got Duncan on here, Duncan Cameron. He's not able to join us today for this training session, but he was he helped create the training session and helped put together the methodology for the soil sampling that you're all going to be taking part in. So by the end of this training session, this hour, we hope that you will be able to describe the aims of SOS-UK and our Farming for Carbon and Nature project, outline how farming in the UK can have a positive impact on the climate crisis, outline how farming in the UK can have a positive impact on nature restoration and supporting biodiversity, define the purpose of the soil sampling and testing activities within the Farming for Carbon and Nature pilot project. And we also hope that you'll be able to conduct soil sampling activities over the next week or two, and that you'll be able to describe what will happen to those soil samples you'll be collecting. So I'm just going to start off with a little bit of background on what SOS-UK is all about. We're a charity that started in 2019 by the student movement, and we engage, support and empower students and wider society. Our mission is to get more students learning, acting and leading for sustainability, embedding sustainability in education and making sustainability more inclusive, so it's for everyone. SOS-UK programmes and projects and campaigns include Green Impact, Student Switch Off, Responsible Futures, Hedgehog Friendly Campus, Drugs and Alcohol Impact, Teach the Future, The Race Report, Breaking the Bank, Carbon Targets, Fair Trade University and College Award, Mock-Up, and there's lots more. And I'm sure you've probably heard of some of these. All of our programmes have either been instigated by students like yourselves or provide opportunities for students to learn, act and lead for sustainability. We've got opportunities available for students in all these programmes, so check out whether they're taking place on your campus. So, as I'm very sure you're aware, we are in a climate and nature emergency, but how can farming help with this? So I'm not going to focus a long time on the climate emergency or the biodiversity crisis, but just to give a bit of context, based on 2030 government targets, there is a 95% probability of exceeding 1.5 degrees, which is the limit that IPCC have said we shouldn't go above without having quite significant consequences. So basically, we can't just rely on government action when it comes to the climate. With the biodiversity crisis, the rapid loss of species and the rapid degradation of ecosystems is also an equally serious problem. You might see it referred to in the news as a nature crisis or ecological crisis too. The UN Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services estimates around 1 million animal and plant species are at risk of extinction. And we're currently losing species 100 to 1,000 times faster than the natural extinction rate. But what about soils? I wonder, Helen, if you want to just say a quick sentence here, like, what about soils?
Oh, there's too much, can't just say it in one sentence. But the thing that frustrates me the most, even when we're talking about these extinction events and biodiversity crisis, is how little focus there is on soil. Despite them being fundamental to everything, you know, they provide 95% of our food, but yet we don't know very much about it. You know, we have air quality legislation, we have water quality legislation, but there is nothing for soil quality. So, I mean, I'll talk more about it probably later on anyway, but I'll stop there. But it's just to get you guys thinking that if all of this stuff is happening above ground, the same things are going to be happening below ground, and we need to be thinking more about that.
Thank you, Helen. So that this diagram kind of shows that we often see pictures around plants and animals above ground, but without the bacteria, the insects, microbes, etc. below ground, none of the life above ground would exist. So soil is really, really important, and it needs some serious help and some focus. This is a global map showing the areas that are at risk of soil biodiversity loss and degradation. And as you can see, most of England is in the very high or high areas, sadly, as much of the world is.
Yeah.
So agriculture has a big impact on the climate and biodiversity crisis. But UK statistics are not the same as global statistics, and sometimes these can get muddled up. So I just wanted to sort of separate these out a bit for you. So 50% of our planet's habitable land is farmed, but in the UK, 70% of all of our land in the UK is farmed. Global food and farming is the biggest driver of biodiversity loss, water use, and soil degradation. And in the UK, we are one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, with wildlife declining by 69% since the intensification of agriculture, which was 50 years ago. And finally, agriculture is responsible for 34% of global emissions, but actually in the UK, agriculture is responsible for 10% of emissions, which is quite interesting. And that is a reflection of difference in farming practices, and particularly around whether it's intensive farming practices or not, where the emissions comes in. So some types of farming can have a positive impact on both the climate and biodiversity crises. These infographics are part of another project that we run, and we run in partnership with two organisations. One works with young farmers in the UK and the other with young food and land justice activists. You may have heard about regenerative or agroecological farming. This is an approach to farming that's conceived around the principles of creating and maintaining healthy soil. So it all comes down to the soil. These principles include disturbing the soil less. So that means reducing ploughing or stopping it altogether, and using green manures. So that's plants that add nutrients to the soil instead of using chemical fertilizers. This can help the climate because ploughing can cause lots of organic carbon from the soils, can cause loss of organic carbon from the soils when you disturb them. And it also uses fossil fuels to power the tractors. Fertilizers also have a big carbon footprint in their production. They use petroleum as the raw ingredient and lead to the emission of nitrous oxide, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. And this happens when they're applied to the land. these farming practices all result in reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So applying cover crops and reducing soil disturbance. But there's also some evidence that farming for healthy soils can lead to net sequestration of carbon into the soils. This means removing some greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and storing them in the soil. And so that's around the climate, but regenerative farming is also nature friendly because it encourages the use of wild areas or specific mixes of wildflowers in the crop rotation, both of which support wild insects that are natural predators of crop pests. This both boosts natural invertebrate populations, which are in decline or under threat in the UK, by providing habitat for them, and reduces or removes the need for pesticides, which actively reduce invertebrate populations, insect populations. Another native species of birds and mammals also benefit from this approach because they rely on invertebrates for food and also for those wild areas for breeding habitats. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an indication of how farming can impact the climate and nature crisis. I now want to just give you a brief overview of our SOS-UK's Farming for Carbon and Nature pilot project and what we're doing with that. So we're working with farms and universities, farms at universities and colleges across the UK. We did some research a few years back that showed that universities and colleges in the UK own around 35,000 hectares of farmland. That's roughly the same as around 65,500 football pitches, if that makes it a bit easier to visualise. And the idea of the project is to support these farms to learn from each other and also learn from experts so that they can farm for better soil health, they can reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and they can help nature and support the recovery and increase of biodiversity. We also want to get more students out on farms and learning about nature, climate and farming, hence why you're on training session. I'm going to do some soil sampling. And we also want to encourage universities to reward the farms that are on their land for the benefits they get from farming for soil health and for nature. So the soil bit of Farming for Carbon and Nature is just one element. We've got an advisory group with lots of experts across the UK, and it's a fantastic advisory group. And from that, we have working groups, we have farm group, we have a group looking at biodiversity and doing biodiversity monitoring on farms. We have an investment model where we're trying to look at how we can help farms get more money to be able to farm in a more regenerative way. And we're also looking at soil and looking at the soil organic carbon, which is why you're here. And this is this part of the project that Helen's been helping to lead on alongside Duncan and some other experts as well. So the farms that we've got involved so far are on here, and as you can see, they're spread across England, right up to Newcastle, down to Bristol, and right across to northeast London, Writtle University College. And there's a mixture of colleges and farms, and a mixture of some are arable crops, some are livestock, some are mixed, quite a variation. So I'm just going to pause there. And then I'm going to hand over to Helen to talk more about soil. But does anybody have any questions? Feel free to, I haven't checked the chat if you've got any questions there, but feel free to unmute if you have any questions.
You got one question, Susanna?
Yes, hi. Thank you for that presentation. I'm always get a little confused with some of the terms, for example, agroecology and regenerative farming. I know sometimes they are used interchangeable, but is there any like particular difference, and what is the farm that we're going to go specifically, or
that's a really great question, and it is confusing, and even in the farming world there is confusion, and not everybody has the same would give the same definitions. I think between nature friendly farming and regenerative farming, it's very much about looking at soil health as the key, that's the key part of that, and about regeneration. So it's about looking at more the farm as a cycle and what causes problems. So if you've got a problem with your livestock, for example, looking at what the cause might be for that. Is it something that that could be treated with the land rather than just giving medical treatment to the animal. It's like looking at it holistically and how things can be treated, and soil health is definitely the crux of that. Agroecological farming, the big difference with that is the social angle. So social justice factors into that. So looking at like land justice and food justice and workers' rights, and fair pay for farmers and fair pay for farm workers, and about having equal access to land, and colonialism, and all those kind of things factor in when you're talking about agroecological farming. And that's definitely where we would love all of UK farming to be agroecological farming, but quite way off with that. But regenerative farming is probably an easier step for farmers to take, and there's a lot of UK farmers that are going in that direction because they know they need to do that really to look after their soils, to be able to have sort of a future in farming. Does that help? Does that clear it up a little bit?
Yes. Just a follow-up question. And pasture-fed farming, that would be part of a lot of regenerative farmings, as I know, but not specifically, right? Not all the farms are pasture-fed. Or
no, they're not all. So that would be the difference between like intensive farming and extensive farming. So there's the Pasture Fed Livestock Association that if they for farms that are certified as pasture fed, and they have to be 100% pasture fed to have that certification. It's a fantastic certification. But most livestock in this country is grass fed, maybe not pasture fed. Pasture fed means there's a variety of crops in the grass. It's not just grass. Often grass fed is just like ryegrass. Most cattle in this country will be grass fed for much of the time, but we fed grains in the winter, and that could be grains from overseas, that's where it becomes more of an unsustainable issue. Whereas in other countries there's intensive livestock farming that's all inside, it's all grain fed, and yeah, that's the least sustainable sort of version of livestock farm.
Yeah, some of the farms, which one was it? It was Northumberland. No, was it Northumberland College? No, Bishop Burton College, sorry. They have made a really big push to get all of their grain imported from the UK to feed their livestock. So they are trying to look at that circular economy approach. Whilst they can't produce enough feed on their own farms, they are only getting, I think they were looking at oilseed rape, bringing some of that in, but from within the UK to feed their livestock, to reduce their overall emissions and costs. So obviously, I don't know if you probably are aware, just based on the questions that you've been asking, of the new sustainable farming incentive from the government that's replacing some of the ELMS or environmental land management schemes from the government. And I mean, I won't go off on one too much on the SFI scheme, because it's really vague. And from all the farmers that I've been talking to over the last couple of weeks, they are just really frustrated because the SFI, there's no kind of standard requirements, there's no values that they're putting on anything. They are just encouraging farmers to test for soil organic matter content. They're not telling them they have to, they just would like to encourage them to think about it, and they will give them I think it's something like £65 for if you sample every 3 years, and then maybe a little bit more money if you do it 5 years. So the new SFI sustainable farming incentives for farmers to try and encourage them to be thinking of these sustainable practices are rubbish and very, very vague. But it's something. At least the government is starting to think about these things. But the farmers, a lot of them are doing it anyway because of the increased overheads that they're having to face, both with fuel prices and fertilizer prices. And obviously, I went to one of the Nature Friendly Farming Network farms, so Martin Lyons' farm, and holy moly, his farm is absolutely incredible with the things that he's doing. And the whole point of Nature Friendly Farming Network, which you guys can all join as well as students, you don't need to be a farmer to join, is to have this kind of community approach and actually talking with different farmers and kind of sharing best practice. And so they've got a thing in their kind of catchment that they kind of move fertilizer around as well. So he's there's a chicken farm that he's got a load of his kind of N&P kind of requirements from that he doesn't need anymore now. So then they kind of move it around the different farms, and they all talking to each other. Oh, I've got this problem. What are you doing? How can we do that? And one of his meadows that we walked through literally just erupted with butterflies. And it was just incredible. And he's trying to just find different ways. I mean, he's quite a fortunate position that he's got enough land and he's got enough cash to probably trial things, but he's saying it shouldn't be at the trade-off. So just because his production might have gone down in terms of yield, he's actually got increased money from some of the biodiversity incentives. And actually he's seeing that he doesn't need as many fertilizer, he doesn't need as much fungicide and pesticides that he's added on, because he's using nature to help him. So he's working, rather than looking at overall amounts, he works out and decreasing the kind of differences in terms of his expenditure. Or decreasing the margins is probably a better term. And he's finding that if he can reduce those margins, then actually he gets more money as well, which is, you know, everyone wants to kind of have more money, but he's seeing those benefits in his land as well in terms of biodiversity. They've got loads of rare breeds that have started nesting on his property. They've got red kites that have just started nesting there. They're now working with RSPB, who he manages their farm for them. So it's, you know, it's incredible, but it's trying to think that it's not just an isolated farm as well, of how connected that they all are, and whether that's under regenerative agriculture or nature-friendly farming or agroecology schemes or anything like that. It's working with nature to kind of get these kind of positive solutions.
Thank you, Helen. I've just added a couple of links in the chat as well, which might be useful for you on that. I'm going to hand over to you now, Helen. That's okay.
Excellent.
Oh,
cool.
Actually, it's a Slido. I forgot about the Slido. So do you want me to go through the Slido first, Helen?
Yes, I don't have access to that.
I don't know if you've all done a Slido before, but if you go to, ideally, if you're on a computer or a laptop and you've got your phone, if you use your phone, or somebody's already on it, use your phone, use the QR code, or just go to slido.com and enter the number 2874819, and then the question will come up and you'll be able to answer it and you'll see the results on the screen. Or if you're on your computer, just go to slido.com and enter that. If you can't access it or having problems, if you don't have a separate device, then feel free to put your answer in the chat box.
Already given the answer away from this question as well. Let's see how much you were listening earlier.
So yeah, what percentage, I'll ask the question today, what percentage of our food comes from soil? You did mention this, Helen. 75%, 95%, 15%, 35%, or 55%. So it's hovering between 75 and 95% at the moment. I think we'll skip through these quite quickly so we don't run out of time. So it's 50-50, neck and neck, 75 and 95%. So the answer is I wasn't come up with the answer.
Oh, well, the answer is 95%.
95%, yeah.
We're gonna have to go to you to the answers for all these, Helen, because
Yeah.
I thought it should come up with the answer. It's not something.
And this is one of those figures that a lot of people don't, they think a lot of people do flip between the 75 and 95, because 95 seems like a heck of a lot, but we get it either directly or indirectly from all of our soils. I won't say any more because I kind of go off on one. It might be some of the other questions. So the next question: there are more living organisms in a teaspoon of soil than people in the UK, species of animals and plants in the Amazon rainforest, people living in Europe and Asia combined, people in the world, stars in the sky. Oh, got a mixed bag on here. So it's tied between people living in Europe and Asia combined or people in the world. Oh, So the correct answer is people in the world. So if you have a healthy soil, you have more organisms in your hand than there are people on the planet, which again is just one of those mind-blowing facts about how awesome soils are, but also how underexplored and undervalued that they are. Because if they hold that much life, then why don't we know more about them? Why don't we actually appreciate and value them more? So the next one, UK soils store over 10 billion tonnes of carbon. How does this compare to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere? Is that soil holds 3 times as much carbon as the atmosphere, twice as much carbon as the atmosphere. Soil and the atmosphere hold similar amounts of carbon. The atmosphere holds twice as much carbon as soil, or the atmosphere holds 3 times as much carbon as soil. Oh, it's coming out a clear winner here. And so the correct answer is soil holds 3 times as much carbon. So well done for all of those of you that have said that one. So again, we know more about what happens on the surface of the moon than we do about processes that go on in our soils. But yeah, it holds so much more carbon than the atmosphere, but it's hard. And you'll see that when you kind of get out and do some soil sampling, it is difficult to collect soils. And each soil, when you collect them, it's so varied as well. And, you know, some of the students have said that even just walking, you know, kind of 30 meters away from one point to another, like, oh, this soil's completely different. So again, how can we get enough data to actually try and validate all of this? And how long the carbon stays in the soil is one of the big problems that we currently face, because that's why there is no legislation about carbon in soils, because there's not enough evidence to prove that it stays in the soil long enough and in what form it's in. Remember, carbon is not just one thing. There are hundreds of different compounds that make up carbon in the soil anyway, or soil organic matter content. So yeah, just some facts here. You know, we all love some good soil facts. It's full of diversity. So, you know, we've got that much kind of life that's in our soils, provides 95% of our food, but it's heavily threatened. So 33% of our global soils are classed as degraded. And so again, if you're doing the maths that you think of 95% of our food coming from our soils, but you know, pretty much a third of them are classed as degraded, what does that mean for our future sustainability of food? You know, they hold lots of different essential elements. You know, they've won kind of Nobel Prizes for some of the, you know, the medicines and pharmaceuticals that we can get from our soils. Unfortunately, though, 2 billion people worldwide suffer from a lack of micronutrients, you know, the hidden hunger. 58% more food could be produced through sustainable soil management. So moving away from these intensified practices and actually thinking about how can we have sustainable practices that are going to go beyond, you know, the lifetime of intensive farming. And up to half of our household waste could be composted to nurture our soils. So sometimes, you know, our soils need a little bit of help, but we can do that. You know, with our green waste that we produce, you can have really good compost that can go back into the soils. We can, you know, when we're out there digging as well, hopefully we'll see some worms, but I've been quite surprised at how few worms I've seen across some of our sites so far, even though they are agricultural colleges. But I think there's a lot more practice that can be done. And certainly better practice that can be done. So yeah, so we've got quite a lot of things to kind of work on with our soils, I think. It's not is that you doing that, or is that me, Tilly? It's not letting me move on. So Tilly's I don't know if it's like you or me, it might be a delay on my computer. But we've got different ways that we can help our soils, and especially when it comes to kind of farming practices. And these are just 7 ways. These are not the only ways. These are just some ideas that that kind of come up with. So the first thing we need to do is actually monitor the soil health on our farms. And a lot of farmers will know that there's certain areas in their farms and fields that maybe aren't doing as well as what they should be. But it costs them money to kind of monitor their soil health. They are encouraged, like I said before, the new SFI schemes are encouraged to look at soil health, but it's not a mandatory requirement. And if they do kind of monitor for soil health, they will often take, the minimum is 10 samples per hectare. And then they get kind of homogenized all together and analyzed all as one. But that doesn't necessarily tell you that much about, well, where's the problem? Have we got problem areas? What's happening like on a spatial scale when it comes to kind of looking at soil health? Again, we've mentioned this about kind of green manures and putting waste and manures back onto the land rather than using kind of fertilizers. However, even though farmers tend to do that with muck spreading, there's not enough nutrients necessarily to feed the nitrogen demand of a lot of our crops, so they will have to top it up with fertilizer. But there are some really cool techniques that are now looking at kind of sonification of pig slurry, where they're looking at trying to make some of the nitrogen forms in there more available to plants. So there's different methods that they're looking at of processing the manure before it gets applied to make things more bioavailable for plants. You can obviously reducing tillage and chemicals, that's a big one that farmers, it's not just about improving soil health, but it's also about reducing costs as well. And again, the Nature Friendly Farming Network farm that I went to, one of their fields that they have added some fungicide on because they've needed to for one field in particular, but other fields with different crops, they realize they don't need to because they're letting nature kind of work its course. And if you've got a good kind of biodiversity, whether it's hedgerows, whether it's herbal lays that they put in or wildflowers, that's going to increase the biodiversity, which will reduce pests because they're going to be feeding on potentially aphids that might be there that damaging the crops and what have you. Again, covering up bare soil with continuous plant cover, I always get really frustrated when I see just bare soil, especially in winter, and when you have slopes and farmers have ploughed down the slope, which they're not really supposed to do because everything just runs down the furrows. They're supposed to be kind of ploughing across the field if you're on a slope. And not actually having bare soil. If you've got bare soil, that's really bad. It doesn't take much, especially, I mean, you've seen the weather that we've had the last few days, few weeks. It can be really hot, and then we can have torrential downpours. And if you've just got bare soil, it's just going to run off. And then if you've got bare soil and it's really sunny, it just bakes. And again, we've seen that on some of the farms that I've been to, where you can just see these desiccation cracks kind of forming where they've got bare soil. So that's another thing. More trees onto farmland. So we mentioned about agroecology schemes, but there's agroforestry. So this can work in some areas. And so there's one field, where is that, Newcastle, that are trialing some agroforestry. So they're planting willow trees in between their crops. But again, it's got to be the right tree that you plant in the right time in the right soil. So if you plant some of really thirsty, water hungry, or water thirsty plants and trees in an area where you don't have much water anyway, then the trees are going to take up the water, and then you're left with a water problem for the rest of your field. So whilst agroforestry can work, it needs to be managed well, and you need to know about your soil types. And then obviously reducing compaction from machinery and livestock. And again, a lot of farmers have noticed that where you have intensive kind of livestock, you'll see poaching on the ground. That's going to be really bad for the soil. You're breaking up that soil structure, and then potentially you're going to have kind of flooding issues later on as well. A lot of the machinery, some of them are better than others, trying to kind of distribute the weight. You'll see tram lines when you're out in the field where they kind of tend to just go over the same lines each time to reduce kind of overall impact on the fields itself. So farmers are doing a lot of these things already because they don't want to damage their fields, but there's things that they can do that's better. Can you move to the next slide, please, Tilly? So again, yeah, the soil health principles, minimum disturbance, continuous cover, living in diverse roots, and feeding the soil ecosystem, not just the plants. And that's really, really important as well. Like the plants, if you don't have healthy soil, the plants have got nothing to live off anyway. And let's go through these. And this is, you've all probably heard of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. there's different ways. I don't like seeing them all just in one kind of row and in a box. I think, you know, that especially when it comes to soils, that, you know, one of the big things I'm trying to do is trying to promote soils and how cool soils are. Having soils at the foundation of our SDGs, that they provide so many different ecosystem services that people just don't necessarily think of when they think of soil. People just see soil as dirt and not necessarily thinking of the wealth of resources that they have, you know, kind of right beneath their feet. So I think it's really important to try and think about these SDGs in a slightly different way. If you kind of think of them as having soil at that basis, and then seeing how soils can actually provide for society as a whole. And I'll talk about more on that when we're out in the field as well. So why are we taking soil samples from FCN farms? Because we want to understand about where carbon is actually being stored in our soils. We don't have enough reliable data on farm soil carbon levels. There are multiple tests that people do as well. So some of the farms that we have approached didn't want to be part of this scheme because they're already part of other carbon schemes. But what we want to do here is trying to look at how we can see impacts of different farming practices on soil carbon. And so what the approach that we've decided to take is comparing 2 different fields on the farms with different farming practices. And so we've had some that have got maybe bean crop rotation, some have got wheat crop rotation, we've had some livestock, we've had permanent pasture. So we've had lots of different types. So we're going to build up a really big picture across the UK as part of this project. And we're going to kind of look at how the soil type, you know, if you remember the map that Tilly showed, you know, we're covering all the way up from Northumberland in the northeast, southwest and the southeast as well, and a few kind of spots in the middle, in the Midlands. So we're going to look at how those soil types kind of change with farming practices, but also with carbon contents. We're also going to be looking at the topsoil. So we're looking at kind of the top 10 to 15 centimetres. And then we're also looking at deeper carbon as well. So the majority of soil samples that are taken for agricultural measurements will just be done in that top kind of 15 centimetres, because that's the kind of common rooting depth for a lot of plants. Quite often they're not required to take measurements at depth. I mean, you'll see why when you're out in the field. It can be sometimes hard to do depending if you've got stones down at depth, and it does involve a lot of hammering the kit to get down to depth. And so then importantly, what we're also looking at, I mentioned before that a lot of the soil sampling is done looking at bulk soil. So you can see in the picture there, that would be a classed as a bulk soil sample that person has in their hands. But actually, I mean, if you look really closely, I mean, you can see that it has different kind of aggregates, it has different shapes. There'll be another picture on the next slide that kind of highlights how all of these different kind of pieces merge together. It's like a jigsaw if you think of soils, or some kind of amazing kind of architectural masterpiece of all these different pieces all connected together. But if you have different sizes of these aggregates in your soil, so when I'm talking about aggregates, think in your mind of kind of crumble topping. You've all made crumble probably when you've been doing some baking, and when you've got that lovely kind of crumb structure, that's what we want in soils. But if you have really large aggregates, they can be easily eroded. Whereas if the carbon is stored actually in some of these smaller ones, they're more tightly bound together and more resistant to runoff and to kind of wind-blown erosion. So if we know that we have that carbon stored in smaller aggregates, then we know that it's going to be stored for longer. And that's what we're going to be doing as part of this project. So we'll be looking at the different size fractions within the soil profile to get a handle on how soil structure influences carbon storage. Next slide, please, Tilly. It's definitely not working on my computer. So when we take the samples, we will arrive at 10 o'clock. So we'll do in the morning, we'll sample field 1, have a little break for lunch, and then we'll sample field 2. And then we'll hopefully leave the farm around 4 o'clock. But just based on what we've been doing the last kind of week and a half, the first field takes longer because that's where you're learning what we're doing. I've managed to get double bits of kit so we can separate off and speed the process up. But depends on the weather conditions. So if it's a bit wet, It's taken us a bit longer to sample just because things get dirty. So it's been more like kind of 4:30, 5 o'clock. So if that's a problem for any of you when you're out in the field, then please let us know. If you have to leave at 4, that is absolutely fine. But just to let you know that it might kind of overrun a little bit, just depending on, well, it depends on the site conditions, depends on how many stones that we find, and depends on the weather as well. So yeah, all the bits of kit, I've got all of the kit, so you don't need to worry about anything. It's all in my car. So we've got soil augers, so we've got different types that I'll show you when we're out in the field. That's a good reminder because I've got ice packs currently in my freezer that I need to go and take and put in the cool boxes. I've got all the sample bags, got pens and pencils. I have the waterproof field notebook. It's definitely seen better days, but it's looking okay at the minute. You'll see it when you work on it. It is holding up just about, so I'm hoping it can hold up for the next week. And then what we are going to be looking at is bulk density. So if you haven't measured it before, we'll go through it all when we're out in the field. So we've got a bulk density corer. I like the word tamper device, which is basically just a mallet that we smack the crap out of the bulk density corer, and we collect the samples from that. And then when I'm back in the lab, I'll be doing the wet sieving, excuse me, and that's when I separate out the soil into the different size fractions. But I'll show you all of the kit when we get out in the field. So the first sample point, I will do it and you can watch it. The second one, I'll kind of observe you guys doing it and kind of help you along the way. And then, you know, the third and the fourth ones, you should know what you're doing. And then we can split off into 2 different groups, and that kind of speeds up the process. Or if you're not comfortable with it, then we don't need to split off. So again, we can see what it's like when we're out in the field and how you guys prefer to work. But we'll show it you all when we're out in the field. So in each field, we are taking a W shape, and this is just a standard method in terms of trying to get that spatial variability when we're out in the field. We will be doing 10 samples per hectare, and the original thing is 10 samples per hectare, kind of not per field, across the field, but some of our sites have been up to, I think the most was 15 hectares, which I don't have enough time, money and resources, and you guys certainly don't have enough time between 10 and 4 to collect that many samples across 15 hectares. So what we're doing for comparison is to do just 10 samples per hectare, per field, per farm, which will give me a total of 600 samples to analyse when I'm back in the lab. So I've done it slightly different from this W, just because when I was out in the field, it kind of worked a little bit better. You can see my hands here. So we'll have sample 1 up here, sample 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we kind of come across onto the next bit of the W to do 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we've just got basically a W with a flat bit in the middle, rather than 4 on one side. This was my fault really, because I thought I could easily get 10 onto a W shape, but in hindsight, probably should have done 9 or 11 would have worked better. But, you know, these things never quite work out according to plan. So basically, at each of these numbered sample points, we will take the deep soil core right in the middle, and then we will do cardinal points. So north, I'm trying to get enough fingers, north, south, east, and west across this center point, and then we collect that as a composite sample. Again, this will make a lot more sense when we're out in the field. And so from each sample point, we get 3 bags of soil. So you get the composite from around those cardinal points. We'll get the bulk density core from the 0 to 10 centimeter surface sample. And then that same hole, we then go down to 30 centimeters and take a deep bulk density core from that center core. And so that's 3 bags of soil per sample point, if that makes sense. So that gives us 3 bags per sample point, basically. So there's a lot of sample bag writing. So again, that's something is challenging when it's raining. So I've got a big umbrella, and we can go and sit in the car if it is really bad weather, but hopefully we'll be okay. And soil testing and data collection. So as I've mentioned, once we're back into the lab, these are going to be measured for soil organic carbon. So we're going to be doing this based on something called the loss on ignition test, which some of you may have done. So you basically put the samples in the oven initially to remove the water content at 105 degrees, weigh them before they go in, weigh them after, and then you put the samples in a muffle furnace for 450 degrees for 8 hours. I mean, there'll be different tests, different protocols online that say do it for 550 degrees for 4 hours, but that burns different fractions of the organic carbon off. But that's the method that we will be using, is 450 degrees for 8 hours. And that will give us our organic matter content. And of organic matter content, 58% of that is classed as carbon. And so then we can apply the correction factor. So we know the organic matter content, and then we'll know the organic matter carbon content as well from that. And I'm going to be doing that for the bulk soil and also for the different aggregate size fractions. That's done by sieving, where you basically get different sieves stacked together, goes into a big container, you fill it with water, and it basically lifts the sieves up and down and separates out the soil into those different fractions. And then from those, again, I'll take off all of the soil that's there, and we'll do the same processes of get rid of the water content first, and then put them in the muffle furnace to get the organic matter content. And so, yeah, this is just to kind of highlight what I'm talking about when I'm meaning kind of aggregates. Again, there are different methods of doing this. You can do dry sieving, you can do wet sieving. If you do dry sieving, it creates a heck of a lot of dust and quite often sets off smoke alarms. So we've opted to do wet sieving just because it's less messy, basically. And it's more relevant to UK soils. Generally, dry sieving is done if you're in kind of more arid environments. And whilst we might not have as much water as we'd like in some of our sites, we're opting for the wet sieving because that's more realistic to the conditions that we would have. And so we're going to be looking, like I said, we're just looking at where within that soil profile that carbon is being stored. There's a whole series of different science about how cool these aggregates are. So actually with Duncan, we've got a new PhD project kind of starting of looking at how microbial associations start those initial binding kind of processes. So what chemicals basically are released that actually help bind these soil particles together to form these aggregates. So we're going to be looking at some newly formed soils from volcanic regions, which is super exciting. But again, you've got biological activity, you've got mineral processes that bind together these particles. So you've got this combination of soil physics, you've got biology, and you've got chemistry all acting to kind of bring these aggregates together and bind them up. And that will obviously store carbon within those aggregates. So next slide, please. So we're going to use this data to kind of increase our scientific knowledge to try and help us understand more about how different farming practices, soil types, and geographical locations affect carbon sequestration or storage. And this, hopefully, if we can understand, well, if you've got this particular soil type, you've got this farming practice, you can store X amount of carbon. So we can potentially model that. So then other farmers that maybe think, oh, well, I know I've got this much carbon in my soil, I've got this particular soil type, I've got this crop rotation. This is what I could either potentially achieve if I do this practice. So we're hoping to share the data with farmers. All the farmers that I've spoken to so far are so happy to be involved in this project because they just want to know what they want to know more about their own soils. They want to know more about what they can do to actually help their soils and have kind of sustainable practices for the future. We will be publishing papers on this as well. So if that's something that you guys are interested in being involved with, then we're more than happy to kind of have you guys on there as authors as well, if you want to kind of participate in that. And obviously I need papers as an academic for my my promotions and things like that. And so the papers are a good way of kind of getting it out there to the scientific partners, but obviously we want to have other ways that we can kind of communicate this with farmers as well. Next slide, please. Is there any more? Oh, now it's back to Tilly.
Thank you so much, Helen. That's super helpful. Great. So I'm just going to go through a few practical things that you'll need to know for doing the soil sampling. So firstly, staying safe on the farm. Please make sure you stay with the group at all times. Stay alert before entering a field. Don't get close to any farm machinery. If there are cows or other livestock blocking your way, then cautiously walk around them. Don't panic or run near them. Always close farm gates if you open them. Take care when crossing tracks or roads, and always check for any approaching machinery or farm vehicles. Let Helen or myself or whoever is the SOS-UK staff member there, let them know straight away if you've hurt yourself or if you feel unwell. And it's really important to stay hydrated, so make sure you bring water with you. You should be able to fill water bottles there as well, but bring a full water bottle with you. Please also be respectful that you're on a working farm, and take any rubbish and all your belongings with you when you leave. Regarding taking photographs and videos on the farm, we'd love you to take videos and photos. If you would like others in the group to be in your photo or video, please just ask for their permission first. And if you see someone photographing or videoing you and you'd rather they didn't, please just let them know. It'd be great if you're happy and everybody in them is given permission, if you could share your photos or videos with us, and so that we can share them on our social media channels like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We've got them all. But if any of them feature other students, please send us their names along with the photo or video, so we can check if they've told us that they're happy to be filmed or photographed. What to wear and to bring on the day, bring warm layers that you can add or take off depending on the weather and how warm you are. Bring footwear that you don't mind getting muddy, ideally walking boots, as they'll give you more protection on uneven ground. Wellies are also okay, or old trainers if you don't have anything more suitable. A waterproof coat. I think at the current weather at the moment, definitely bring a waterproof coat. Helen was saying there's some students last week, it was pouring down rain and people didn't bring waterproofs. You're going to get wet, basically. So take waterproofs coat with you with a hood. If you've got waterproof trousers too, great. And bring a sun hat, though the sun might come out and it might be 30 degrees, who knows at the moment.
We've literally had everything. It's been sunny and then it's been raining and sunny at the same time. You're like, what is going on? But yeah, please bring waterproofs. Yeah, we had students that were just in really heavy kind of cotton jumpers. It's like, oh my god, that's just going to get really wet and soggy. Yeah, please bring a waterproof.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah. And if you bring a small backpack that you can then easily carry all your different layers and waterproofs in, that'd be great. And like I said, full water bottle. Make sure you bring lunch with you, and any snacks that you might want during the day. Also good to bring some hand sanitizer and bring some sunscreen. If it's forecast to be sunny, but probably just anyway, because like we said, it's unpredictable, especially if you're somebody who burns quite easily. It's just best just to stick a bottle in your bag. And don't bring anything that you would mind getting muddy, and no special clothes or anything. With the logistics, if you're ill or running late, please just let us know as soon as possible by any means. That would be great. If the farm visit needs to be cancelled, we very much hope it won't, and we'll do everything we can to make sure it will go ahead. But if anything does change last minute, and it could be extreme weather or train strikes or any other foreseeable reason, we will let you know as soon as possible. As it were, WhatsApp group set up last week, Helen. I'm not sure if that was something that we said originally, and then that we've decided not to do that.
Not that I was included in. Well, I think it was more everyone messaged the SOS-UK person who was there.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so ignore the WhatsApp group. I think that's things have changed a little bit in the last week or two from when we initially did the training slides.
As long as you've got someone's mobile phone number to get in touch with, that's the most important thing. Or just
And that should be my colleague Kate Winters, who I'm sure you've had emails from so far. She'll be giving you all the information you need. So what will happen next? So hopefully you've completed our baseline student survey, and you've attended this online soil sampling training. The next thing that happened is you actually go out on a farm in the next week or so to do your soil sampling. Then we'll ask you to complete a student follow-up survey, and then we'll give you a bank details form to be able to claim your expenses, and that's up to £40, and you'll receive a digital badge as well. We're almost there. We've just got a couple of other things, but if you've got any burning questions at this point, actually I've just noticed the time, 11:59. I'm just going to carry on. If you've got any burning questions, if you could put it in the chat, and Helen can hopefully reply for you. So a few last things. We've got some reading and resources. Like I said, we'll share the slides, so they'll be on there. Want to do a special thank you to Helen and Duncan for their help, other members of our SOAR working group that have also fed into the training and the SOAR methodology. Oh, gone too fast on this. If I could just ask you very quickly to complete our Slido about the training, that would be much appreciated. Same format as before, just use the QR code or go to slido.com. I've just got a couple of questions on there, and then that'll be the end of our training session. Thank you, Celine. You've just I put myself a note and then I haven't said, please do confirm your attendance by email. We haven't had everybody confirm their attendance by email, especially for Oxford and Bristol, because if you haven't confirmed your attendance by email, you won't get a space in the taxis to be able to get to and from the farm. So really critical that you respond to Kate's emails to confirm your attendance, please. So if you could, what you're answering, how did you find the soil sampling training overall? Is it excellent, above average, average, below average, or poor, or you don't know? Let's leave that for 1 second. Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next one. Which of the following statements, if any, apply to you following the training? Please pick all that apply. The training helped me feel more prepared for the soil sampling field trip. I'm worried about the soil sampling field trip. The training was challenging. I feel more confident about completing the soil sampling now I've completed the training. I enjoyed taking part in the training. I know more about how farming can impact soil health and carbon sequestration. I know more about soil, how soil sampling and testing for soil for carbon can help
universities achieve their net zero targets.
Thank you. It got off the bottom of my screen.
A question. I am in the Slido webpage and I don't see those questions.
Oh, if they're not coming up for you, if you can just type in the chat box, and if you want to just put like the number them, like, or A, B, C, D, E, F, we can match them up.
Okay,
that's easier. Thank you. I can also leave this poll open so that you can go back to it afterwards for anybody if you wanted to do that. And then the next one is just what have you enjoyed most about the training? So the results of all of these ones, these feedback ones, are anonymous. That's why it's not coming up. So
it's just to help us for when we do these again. We got some good feedback from the last one as well that we ran.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really useful. We're hoping to do this soil sampling every year so that we can have comparative results. And this is the first year we've done it. So all of this is new. So any feedback's useful. And apologies, we've gone a couple of minutes over. There's just one more question after this. And then we're done. I want to move on because I can see it says people are typing. Okay, thank you so much. And then just the last one is, what could we improve about the training? Is there anything that you can think of? That's the last question. And Susanna or anybody else, if you're not able to like access the Slido, if you don't want it to make it, if you want it anonymous, just you can do a message in the chat that's just to myself or Helen. It doesn't have to be to everybody. I've just read it. Yeah, I can see that there's still participants typing there, so I won't close this now, but I'd just like to say thank you so much for all taking part in this training. Really appreciate you taking the time out. And I really, I'll be at Hartbury tomorrow, so whoever's going to be there, I'll see you then. And I hope you will enjoy your soil sampling. If you've got any questions at all, please message me or Helen or email foodandfarming@sos-uk.org, and don't forget to confirm that you want to go on the field visit as well.
Yeah,
So
I'll
much.
be there at all of the sites as well.
Thank you,
I
Tilly.
love
Thank
soil.
you.
Sorry, Marcus, what was that?
Thank you, Tilly, and thank you, Helen. Much appreciated.
No problem.
I have a silly query. Normally, when I go to Harbury and I do these events or conferences, we normally come back with a little souvenir, like a T-shirt or something, with like printed soil sampler or something on it. Maybe for future reference, like you could promise us a polo or a T-shirt with something printed on it.
We were talking about that actually up in Newcastle, about what free stuff it was for, not for this project, but for different ones, about what free stuff that would actually entice people to do more. T-shirts didn't actually come up. I think it was bottle openers was the most popular one.
Well, I've got a few T-shirts and polos now from the events that I've done, and I love them, you know. So think about it. It's not a bad idea.
I'd like a T-shirt because then I don't have to get my stuff dirty.
Yeah, we're putting in a new funding application for continuation funding for this project going forward. So I'll add that into our funding application. Yeah. Thank you, Marcus. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, unfortunately, you don't get anything free. You might get a pencil.
I love that.
You can take some soil home with you. That's always good.
Thank you.
Right, I've seen that people have stopped typing on the poll now, so I'm gonna stop recording and close the this call. So thank you again so much, and look forward to seeing some of you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.